You've read the book, you've watched the videos, you've made the plan, written it down, maybe even told someone about it, and then you didn't do it. Not because you forgot, not because something came up, not because you ran out of time. You knew exactly what the next step was. You could have described it in detail. You just didn't take it. That's not laziness. That's not weakness. That's not a motivation problem. Those are the explanations you've been using. They're not wrong. They're just aimed at the wrong target. The knowledge was there. The intention was real. Something else stopped the motion. And it wasn't you choosing not to move. This video will not give you a system. It will not offer a method. It will not tell you how to finally close the gap between knowing and doing. What it will do is name the gap with enough precision that you stop misidentifying where the problem actually lives. That's the distinction most conversations about this topic skip entirely. Knowing what to do and doing it are not different levels of the same process. They are different processes, running on different systems, in different parts of the brain, with different triggers, different fuels, and different definitions of what counts as a reason to move. Most frameworks treat the knowing-doing gap as a volume problem. You didn't have enough information. You weren't motivated enough. You didn't want it badly enough. So the solution is always more. More knowledge, more inspiration, more accountability, more reminders. That logic assumes the two systems are connected. In a way, they are not. The system that understands information is not the system that initiates action. These are not two ends of a single pipeline. They are architecturally separate. One processes language, sequence, and abstract futures. The other processes threat, safety, and the immediate cost of movement. You can fill one system completely and leave the other entirely unmoved. This is the technical distinction that changes what the problem actually is. It's not, you didn't understand well enough. It's, you understood through a system that has no direct line to the system that moves you. In the late 1990s, a psychologist named Peter Gollwitzer was running studies on what he called implementation intentions, the specific mental bridge between deciding to do something and actually doing it. His team took two groups. Both were told the same goal. Both understood it. Both agreed it was important. One group was given an additional instruction: name when, where, and how specifically they would act. Not why, not how much they wanted the outcome, just the exact situational trigger that would initiate the behavior. The difference in follow-through was not marginal. It was between 30 and 300%, depending on the behavior tested. The disturbing part of that finding was not the size of the effect. It was what the effect implied. The group that failed was not less motivated. They were not less informed. They had the same goal and the same understanding of the goal. What they lacked was a signal recognizable to the system that actually launches action. There is a layer of that data Gollwitzer's team documented that almost never appears in the popular discussions of this research. That layer comes later. The brain structure most directly involved in this gap is the anterior cingulate cortex, a region that monitors conflict between competing signals. It detects when what you plan to do and what your system defaults to doing are not the same. It does not resolve the conflict in favor of the plan. It registers the conflict and waits for a stronger signal to determine which system wins. The system carrying the knowledge of what you should do sends a low-intensity signal. It's abstract. It references a future state. The other system, the one monitoring immediate cost, immediate safety, and the energy required to change a default, sends a high-intensity signal. It's immediate. It's concrete. It references right now, signal strength is not determined by correctness. It's not determined by how much you want the outcome. It's determined by specificity and proximity. The plan loses not because you chose the wrong thing. The plan loses because it spoke in a register the motor system doesn't respond to. This is architecture, not character. Think about when that architecture was built. Not in the last year. Not when you started failing at the thing you know you should be doing. Think earlier, much earlier. At some point in your development, the gap between intention and action was survival relevant. The environment you were in did not reward movement toward abstract future outcomes. It rewarded reading the present signal correctly, staying still when stillness was safe, moving only when the cost of not moving was immediate. Think about the first time you knew the right thing to do and didn't do it. How old were you? What did the room feel like? What would have happened if you had moved? The system learned then that knowing is not enough to justify the energy of action. It learned that abstract future benefit is not a reliable signal. It learned to wait for something more concrete, something closer, something that registered as real. You didn't build that calibration consciously. It was installed before you had the language to question whether it was accurate. Here's the complication most conversations about this gap refuse to include. That calibration was not a mistake. The system that resists moving toward abstract future goals was intelligent. It was intelligent for the conditions in which it was trained. In an environment where resources were uncertain, where the cost of failed movement was high, where the future was genuinely harder to trust than the present. A system that required concrete, immediate, high-intensity signals before acting was not broken. It was efficient. The problem is that the environment changed. The conditions that made the calibration correct no longer exist in the same form. The system has not been notified. Knowing that does not update the system. This is the part the reversal does not resolve. The origin becomes clear. The intelligence of the original solution becomes clear. The system continues running the same pattern. Understanding the history of a circuit does not reroute it. You can hold both of those facts at the same time. Most people prefer not to. The Data Gollwitzer's team documented the finding that almost never enters the popular version of this research had to do with failure conditions. The researchers identified a specific pattern in participants who had implementation intentions and still didn't follow through. The cause was not motivational. It was not informational. It was a precise condition. When the implementation intention referenced a future that the person had no concrete sensory template for, the bridge failed. The brain could not simulate the moment of action because it had no stored signal for what that moment felt like. The intention existed as a concept, not as an encoded scene, not as something the motor system recognized as real. The plan was filed in the archive of things understood. The system that initiates movement never received it. The signal never crossed the gap, not because the person was unwilling, but because the bridge itself was built from material the action system doesn't read. That is not a small finding. It means the format of the intention matters more than the strength of the motivation. This is where willpower fails first, not because willpower is weak, because willpower is deployed against the wrong bottleneck. Willpower operates through effortful override. It borrows from the system that reasons and plans and uses it to suppress the system that defaults. The problem is that suppression is expensive. It depletes. The system it's suppressing does not deplete. It waits. Discipline frameworks assume the gap is a compliance problem. If you were consistent enough, structured enough, committed enough, the behavior would follow. The assumption is that the knowing system, given enough enforcement, eventually dominates. It doesn't. Enforcement is a high-cost signal in a system that prefers low-cost defaults. The moment enforcement drops, fatigue, distraction, disruption, the default resurfaces. Habit stacking assumes that pairing a new behavior with an existing one transfers the existing behavior's automaticity to the new one. It can. When the new behavior is low cost and the existing cue is high frequency and the context remains constant. The moment any of those conditions shifts, the stack collapses. Accountability adds social cost to inaction. That works until it doesn't feel socially costly anymore, until the relationship normalizes your non-compliance, until the accountability partner stops expecting anything different. The right question is not, how do I make myself do what I already know to do? It's, what signal does the action system actually respond to? And have I ever sent it that signal in that register? The specific moment arrives with a particular quality. You've probably noticed it. You're in the moment that was supposed to be the moment, the time you said you would start, the context that was supposed to trigger the behavior. Everything is in place. Externally, the conditions are correct. Nothing moves. Not a decision not to move. Not a choice to delay. The system simply doesn't fire. The knowing part of you watches. The initiating part of you waits for a signal that hasn't arrived. The knowledge is entirely present. The behavior is entirely absent. They are in the same body. They are not in communication. That is not failure. That is two systems running their respective defaults. One defaults to knowing. One defaults to not moving until it receives a concrete, immediate, high-intensity signal. Neither is malfunctioning. Neither is responding to the other. You, in the gap between them. Over time, the gap produces something specific, not dramatic suffering, not obvious dysfunction, something quieter. The territory of what you allow yourself to attempt contracts, not consciously, not in one decision. In accumulated small retreats from the edge of the gap, you stop standing in front of certain doors. The map of what you consider possible narrows. Not because you examined the possibilities and found them unreachable, but because the repeated experience of knowing without moving eventually registers as information about the terrain itself. The territory feels smaller than it is. The map was drawn in rooms you were already standing still in. What gets built is a stable life, organized around the gap, optimized for the distance between understanding and initiating, comfortable with the precise width of that distance, not growing into it, not closing it, living in the space its existence creates. The negotiated stability is the invisible cost, not paid once, paid in the compounding interest of futures not entered. There is one implication that almost never enters the popular conversation about this gap. The action system does not only resist new behavior, it actively anticipates the gap. Over sufficient repetition of the knowing without doing cycle, the system begins to pattern match the act of knowing itself as a precursor to non-action. Understanding becomes, at the neural level, associated with the absence of movement. The intention signal and the stillness response become paired. This is not speculation. It is the conditioned suppression of initiation, trained by the cycle itself. The path of change exists. It involves working in the signal register the action system actually reads. It is slow. It is nonlinear. It is incompatible with the insight to transformation model most people bring to this problem. Understanding the gap does not close it. Feeling the recognition of this mechanism does not close it. The mechanism continues. You now have a more precise name for what continues. You're in the gap right now, reading this, understanding, recognizing, the knowing system fully engaged. The other system, watching, waiting for a signal in a different language. That's not a metaphor. That's the architecture. The gap was there before this. It will be there after. What changed is the precision of the name you have for it, not the distance. The system that doesn't respond to knowing, it does respond to something, not inspiration, not understanding, not intention stated in the language of goals. What actually moves, it operates much closer to loss than to gain, much closer to what disappears if you don't move than to what arrives if you do. That mechanism has its own architecture, its own history, and the next video names exactly how it was built and why discipline has nothing to do with it. Watch it now.